Here we are, a fine 20 plus common taken from Durleigh Reservoir, which is near my home in Somerset. And this episode of Carp Coach is going to be all about catching carp at long range and how to fish at range effectively. This was part of a double take, and I've got to be honest, this is probably the first time I've ever seen it without a ripple on it, and they are absolutely ripping the bait up out there. So I'm almost convinced that once we get this back and the rod back out, it isn't going to take a long time to get another bite. Because of the size of Durleigh, you know, it's sort of, at the moment it's about 65 acres, but the water's right down, and when it's at its peak it's upwards of 70, 75 acres. A lot of the carp, you know, there's quite a lot of anglers on there, a lot of the carp spend a lot of time out in the middle of the lake, which is, you know, is inaccessible for nigh on every angler. The middle of the lake's 250, 300 yards, it's miles out. There's a big area of buoys out in the middle. The fish spend a lot of time around there, and you want to get as close to them as you can without fishing dangerously, i.e. with the tackle what you're using, or running the risk of stringing the carp up around the buoys. So the tackle that I'm using allows me to get the distance nice and safe and land the fish nice and safe as well. And you'll probably notice as well, there's a lot of bream. You'll see big hook baits swadding out big boilies. The lake is absolutely riddled with bream, all between about 1 and 6 pound. And they are an absolute nightmare. And with fishing at long range, the stretching the mono, you just get zero indication when you've got one of them on, so you want to try your best to avoid hooking into any of them. But so far, today has been a really, really good day. With it being so big and open, it only takes a slight breeze on here and it's absolutely motoring across here, the wind. But this is the first time I've ever been here. It's flat calm, there isn't a single drop of wind on the whole lake, and it's actually nice to see that over the bait that I'm putting out, there's actually quite a lot of fish fizzing up, which I'm sure they do. That's another nice fish. Which I'm sure they do when the ripple's on, but it's just nice today that you can actually see it happening and almost time your bites by it. So this one's getting ready for the net. Looks like another, that's probably a 20 pound common. Lovely quality fish in here as well. Oh, that's a nice fish, that one. Nice bright hook bait hanging out of its mouth. Here he goes. Another one bites the dust. There we go, another hard fighting Durleigh Reservoir common. This one was taken on the Snowman, a rig that I use down here probably 99% of the time. So we'll slip him back, get the rods back out, and we'll run through a few rigs.
I wanna show you all the things I've seen. Difficult to say what I mean. Sometimes I feel we're all in a dream.
When it comes to rigs for distance fishing, my preferred setup is the bog standard leg clip arrangement. 30 pound pre-tied submerged leader, a lead clip, 4 1/4 ounce lead, and I've got a quick chain swivel on the end as well. I'm not fishing here to drop the lead. There isn't loads of snags. There is a few snags in here, but I know that there's none in the peg that I'm fishing that's going to cause me any sort of danger. So I know that when I get a bite, probably 8 out of 10 times it's going to come in with the lead on. The distance that you're fishing as well, you've got that much stretch in the mono. Even if you do get an aggressive take, the mono will act like a bit of a bungee, and you'll find that the lead won't drop. But should this come into contact with any sort of snag or what have you out there, the lead can simply pop off and you're fishing completely safe. Hook link wise, 35 pound Mac Cortex, This is just the brown version. It doesn't matter, the water's quite sort of almost like a reddy brown in here if you like. 6 to 8 inches I suppose. It won't tangle. I don't want to be using a 20-pound braided rig or maybe a 15-pound coated braid because it might be tangling. You're chucking it a long way. You're asking a lot for that rig to sit how you want it to sit. That's knotless knotted, size 4 wide gate beak, nice big hook. You're fishing at long range. The last thing you want to be doing is winding the fish 3/4 of the way in and it drops off. I know if one of them goes in a fish's mouth, there's a good chance that that fish is going to be in the back of the landing net. Tiny little piece of hook silicone there, that's just to trap the hair. And on the end, you'll see I've got a 16mm bottom bait and a 16mm pop-up. Now that probably when I chuck it out, the pop-up will be a little bit over buoyant. Just trim it off and that will sit down nice and slow. And that's the snowman presentation that I use. The one thing I would say is there is a lot of bream in here, but when times do get a little bit hard and it's a little bit scratchy, solid bags work extremely well. I've had a lot of carp out of here. When it's gone quiet like it has now for a few hours, bring the rods in, 3 solid PVA bags, put a bit of oil into them and just blast them as far as you can. Now, they're an absolutely brilliant method for fishing long range, and if you're struggling, say in a wind or what have you, to get rigs onto a spot and you just think, well, I want to get it out there, put a solid bag out. You've got a little pile of attraction. All right, you've only got a small hook bait, so the chances are you might catch a bream, but if a carp beats the bream there, you are going to catch carp. And I've had days down here before where I put bait out thinking that's going to be the right thing to do, and it's flipped right on its head and I've ended up catching more carp just fishing with solid bags and 10mm pop-up. But you have got to be prepared to go through the bream. So if I'm catching over the bait, I'll be chucking the snowman rigs out, and if I'm scratching for bites, I'll be bringing a couple of rods in, chucking them out on solids. On the munch now, H-bomb. What do we mean by distance? Distance isn't all about chucking it as far as you can, or as, a million miles and showing off to your mate next door that you can put a lead the furthest. Distance to me is fishing just past the anglers that are fishing to the left and to the right here. Now, if you're fishing a lake that's weedy, snaggy, got islands in it, obviously you're not going to be able to fish distance and past them. You can only fish to where the features are. But open reservoirs like this, big gravel pits like Linear, going them extra few yards can definitely benefit you. I know this lake quite well. I've come down here today, I've clipped the rods up at home. The rods are clipped at 120 yards. Now I know the average angler that comes down here is fishing anywhere between 80 and 100. So I'm not trying to massively outrange them. It's absolutely pointless me coming down there and trying to fish 160 yards. A, because I'll be totally honest, with the conditions that you get down here, I can't fish it accurately. There isn't many people out there that can. And B, there's simply no need to. These fish are used to being fed anywhere between sort of, say 60 to 100 yards. If I go fishing 60, 70 yards past there, the fish aren't used to seeing bait out there. So as far as I'm concerned, I want to be just fractionally off the back of where everyone else is fishing. So when they've got all their rods out, my rods are slightly behind theirs. And if any fish, is moving along that back line, the first rigs they're going to come into contact with are going to be mine. Now, again, when it comes to distance fishing, you want to make sure you've got the right tackle. You do not want to be turning up here with heavy line, soft rods, big leads, no shock leaders, because these are all things that are going to be a danger to you and a danger to the fish. So let's just have a quick run through of what tackle I use to get the distance.
Are you gonna make it happen today? Or will you just settle for another delay? Come on, you gotta make it happen now. Come on, you gotta make it happen now. Sit. Are you gonna wait and sit on your hands, or will you go and start making out a list of demands? Cause you can make it happen, so choose if it's your passion to move. But start attacking, don't lose out on the action.
When it comes to picking your rod for distance fishing, you really have got to make sure that you pick the right rod for you. Now, what I mean by that is don't just go out and think that if you buy a 13-foot rod, you're going to be able to send a lead to the horizon, because certainly for me, that isn't the case. I cannot get along with a 13-foot rod, and believe me, I've tried many different types, and I just cannot get along with them. I either cast too high, too low, it's just far too inconsistent. For me, the perfect length rod is a 12 or a 12'6". Test curve, these are 3.5 pound test curve. You can go for a 3 3/4 pound test curve rod, but it's what do you want to do? If you're trying to go extreme range, yes, it may help you get a few extra yards, but when you're hooking into a fish, you've completely lost all the play in action, and you know, you'd be slogging your guts out all day trying to get the rigs out to where you want them to, you know, to eventually land, only to hook a fish, and then when you start playing it in, you just literally feels like you're playing nothing, and you just get no enjoyment, which for me, that's the biggest part of, you know, of fishing in general, whether it be at range or fishing close. But so this is the X4 12 foot 3.5 pound test curve. It's got a lovely play in action, lovely casting action, and what I would say as well is if you want to be chucking distance, is you want to be using a 3.5 pound test curve at minimum. You know, you're going to be using the lead upwards of 4.25 ounces, and if you've got a 3 pound test curve rod and you go and put a 4 ounce lead on it, it's simply not going to get out there. It's either going to snap the rod, or the rod's just going to be massively over compressed and it's going to end up going nowhere. So 12 foot 3.5 pound test curve rod with a 4 ounce lead, plus by the time you put your hook bait on the end and you've got a rig going out there, that's going to sort of, you know, add a little extra weight. And then on big lakes like what we're fishing here today, if the wind does pick up, it gives me the option of putting maybe a 4.25 or 4.5 ounce lead and not having to worry about that on the rod. Obviously following on from that, you've then got the reel and the line choice. When it comes to reels, you've got to use a big pit reel for long range fishing. Main reason, nice big spool, holds a lot of line, and the line comes off it a lot easier, and if you go in the distance, the line doesn't go a long way underneath the lip of the spool, causing friction and drag and the lead slowing down as it's going through flight. This is a 12,000 EOS, it isn't going to break the bank, it's not a massively expensive reel, and this is the reel that I use for all of my fishing, regardless if I'm fishing short or long range. It does exactly what I want it to do, and for me it is absolutely perfect. What you'll notice as well, the spool is loaded right to the top of the line. I back them up, well, one of them, and I'll wind on 250 yards of line, then I'll wind the back in until it gets to the top of the spool, and then I'll reverse it back onto another spool, and then I know that every one of my spools is loaded absolutely perfectly. And what I'll do as well is I'll only put between 200 and 220 yards of line on each spool. Now, people might think that's crazy, but if you chuck out and from, you know, for some unfortunate reason you get a snap off or your line runs through a snag, it isn't no biggie to whip the line off and re-spool it and put another 200 meters on. If you go loading each spool up with light line, A, it's a complete waste of line, and B, you don't need to. You know, you're not going to ever be fishing any further than, even if there's a massive wind off your back, say you're not going to be fishing any further than 160, 180 yards at absolute maximum. So you've always got line on the spool. The fish is never going to make it out to there. And like I say, if you get any breakages, it's very easy to whip the line off and re-spool. So nice light line on there. This is 13 pound extra set. It's 0.30. Nice casting line. You know, if you want to do distance chuck in and you've got a 15, 18 pound line on, you're simply going to get to sort of 80, 90 yards. It's going to start fizzling out, and the drag of the line is going to pull the lead, and you're not going to be able to fish the range that you want to fish. So yeah, loaded up to the top, 13 pound extra set, and on there you'll see I've got a braided shock leader, exactly like I always do. But when I'm going like for distance fishing, I'll put more shock leader on than what I'd normally do. So normally I'll put 3 or 4 turns on the reel and then back down to the reel itself, and that's sort of what I would say is like a perfectly adequate leader length. But when I'm distance fishing, even though these rods have got a really, really quick recovery, I want to put a longer leader on to make sure that the rod is fully recovered before the leader knot goes through the eyes of the rods. Rod's got a 50mm butt ring, so obviously that aids in casting massively as well, but you don't want your rod start flapping and your leader not go through, because that is obviously going to be the only little sort of, you know, knot on your line, if you like, and if that hooks around your butt ring, it's going to snap off and you're just going to end up leaving tackle out in the lake. So big pit reel, light line, nice loaded spool right up to the top, braided shock leader, and one last thing, if you're chucking with braid or any sort of line for distance, you have got to use a finger stool, because if you do not use a finger stool and you haven't done that clutch up, trust me, and I've seen it happen quite a few times, your finger is going to be in a lot of pain and you'll probably be going to hospital and having a couple of stitches in it. So that's the reel, load them right up and always use a finger stool. Fortunately down here at Durleigh, I can get away with using light lines and a shock leader. You know, primarily a braided shock leader is what I'll always use, but a lot of venues now, they ban shock leaders, you know, for one reason or another. Fishery rules are fishery rules. So if the fishery that you're going to, or the venue you're going to, bans shock leaders, then tapered mainline is absolutely fantastic. It's double tapered mainline as well. So what that basically means is 300 metres long, and there's an infused leader on each end. So if you snap off at one end, you can reverse it and you've got the leader on the other end. £12 to £35. So you've got 0.50 at your casting. Now obviously the mono is going to be slightly thicker than what it is on the braid, so it will feel a little bit different if you're used to chucking with a braided shock leader, but 0.50, you know, you could chuck the biggest lead on that, isn't going to break, all the way down to £12, which is 0.30, which is exactly what I'm using here. So basically you've still got the leader effect, but without actually tying a leader knot. So yeah, if the venue you're fishing doesn't allow shock leaders, tapered leader line is definitely worth checking out. Bent into another carp, which I believe is number 8 of the day so far. You know, even though this is a massive lake and the fish are out in the middle, sort of inaccessible to most people most of the time, I don't come down here and try and fish any different to how I would fish, say, up Oxford way. The only thing that I'm changing is obviously the reel line that I'm using, the hook baits I'm using, and what I'm spotting out. Very, very flat at the bottom of the lake. Pretty much what you see I'm stood on is exactly what the bed of the lake's like. It's rocky, a little bit of sort of clay, ready mud in between. Just out in the middle you get a bit of sediment that settles on top. This lake's used for drinking water, so the water's always moving through the lake. It gets flushed in at one end and pumped out the other end. So the bottom of the lake is always sort of, you know, changing around, if you like. As I said, there's a lot of bream in here, and the last thing you want to be doing is coming down here and catching loads of bream in a day's fishing. So all I do is I clip my rods up at home, so I look at the weather before I come, which is massively important because a lake of this size, if it's forecast a 10-12 mile an hour wind, it's probably going to be somewhere in the region of sort of 20-22 mile an hour. So you don't want to be fishing millions and millions of miles out where you know that you start fishing, the wind picks up and then you can't get onto your bait. So on this occasion, I know it's not going to be mega windy. Picked up at 120 yards, which is 30 rod lengths, and for the tackle that I'm using, that's a perfectly adequate distance. I can hit it with ease. I'm on the clip every time, and I know that I can present bait out there. And I literally just pick, not a really tight area because you're fishing with boilies, so because the lake's only sort of 12-14 foot deep, they'd be dropping in clumps, so I sort of pick a couple of trees and fish between 2 trees, 3 rods, 10 spots of boilies, and treat it as if I was in somewhere like Oxford, you know. Just because you're fishing with boilies, it doesn't mean that you can't sort of keep introducing them. Just don't introduce them on such a tight area. They just go crazy, don't they? There he goes. Oh, he's a long one. Proper wild one. In the net. There we go, another fine example of a Durleigh Reservoir common. Massive overslung mouth, super long barbills, and built for absolute power. The lake is predominantly commons. It'd be really, really nice to catch a mirror because they are absolutely stunning. We'll get him back, get the rods back out, and hopefully the next one might just be a mirror. Before I put a few more spots out, I'm just going to show you exactly what I'm using. It isn't groundbreaking. I'm not going to pull something out of here that no one's ever seen before. It is simply just boilies. I've got 20mm krill and I've got 16mm krill. These are shelf life ones. For this type of fishing, I'm not too fussed, and if I'm totally honest with you, the difference between a freezer and a shelf life really doesn't bother me. But what I have done, which I suppose is a little bit different to probably what most people do, this being a day only venue, people turn up in the morning, fresh bag of bait, chuck fresh bait out on top of what's been left out there all night, you know, if anything's not been eaten, and then they start fishing over, you know, brand new bait effectively. What I do, a couple of days before I know I'm going to come, you don't need a lot of bait. I brought 3 kilos with me today, 2 kilos of 20s and a kilo of 16s. Empty them into a bucket, fill them about an inch above, just with water straight out the tap. Again, I don't read into all this sort of, you know, fill them up with lake water, blah, 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 blah. To me, tap water is perfectly good enough. A bit of salt. I say a bit of salt, I probably put about a quarter of a kilo of salt in there. That'll obviously dilute into the water, and then into the water as well, just half a bottle of cloudy krill liquid. And what that does is it just soaks the boilies, but at the same time as it soaks them and makes them soft, it also gives them a lot more attraction and a lot more flavour. So when I'm spotting them out, obviously these aren't fresh, they're not straight out the packet, they're not like harder than what they are, they're nice and soft. and when the fish come over them, they're a lot easier to digest, and I find that just gets your bites a lot quicker. And then one last thing, the reason for the mixing sizes, when you're putting them inside a spod, you're not getting many 20 millers to a spod, and if the wind picks up, casting a spod full of boilies is actually quite hard because they don't weigh a lot. So by putting the 16s in and then crumbing the odd 1 or 2 in there as well, it just fills the gap and makes the spod as heavy as possible. So I'm going to fire a few more of these out and hopefully get a few more bites. When it comes to technique for casting distance, you want to make sure that everything is as smooth as possible. If you start snatching at a cast, you're either going to get a tackle malfunction or you're going to get a snap off, and that is not what you want happening. So you want to make sure you're as smooth as you can possibly be. So I've never been taught to cast, I'm all self-taught. My dad obviously showed me years ago how to fish, but I think, you know, casting at any level is sort of a natural thing. You can either cast or, you know, you might need a little bit of guidance, and there is people out there that you can book on with and they will show you how to put yards on your cast. But for me, you know, people might be watching this thinking, oh no, he needs to do this for casting distance, but this technique and how I chuck works for me. So I'll show you how I chuck. First things first, leader knot always goes at the bottom of the spool. Obvious reason, if you have it halfway up the spool or at the top of the spool, as the leader's coming off, it could hook on the leader knot, rip a load of line off, snap off, and again you can have a disaster that can easily be avoided. So first things first, finger stools on, and I want the lead. A lot of people say to the spigot, but I like a bit of a shorter drop than most people, and I'll go to probably between the spigot and the second eye up on the rod, so maybe about 4.5, 5 foot of drop. So that's what I'm looking for there. Tighten the clutch up, open the bail arm, and that's everything set to go. The bank that we've got behind us here is a little bit of a slope. Obviously if you're chucking at extreme range, if the bank's flat behind you, it's obviously going to make things a lot easier. Here, you know, as you're swinging the rod over your head, you can't put the rod as far down as what you could do if you had a flat ground. So line up with where you want to chuck, literally over your head, and then just with your finger, if you just pull your finger up and down, you can feel it. It's not hooked around the tip or nothing. If you're unsure, just have a little turn around and have a check. And then I always just spread my legs slightly apart just to get myself nice and secure. I don't do all this like some people like stomp and stuff into a cast. I think the minute you come off of, you know, both legs, that you've lost a little bit of balance. And literally, I always sort of looking down, you know, what will be my right arm, which is on the end of the rod. That's always aiming towards exactly where I want to be casting. And then I'm literally just doing everything really smooth, really slowly. I'm going to start just by going down, slowly, slowly, slowly. And as I go down, really punching it. And the harder that you get, and that's hit the clip perfectly, feel it down. And what you'd notice is the hand that's holding the butt of the rod, you almost want to punch yourself in the stomach. The harder you pull that hand there into your stomach, the faster you're going to get the tip moving. And the faster the tip's moving, the more the rod's going to compress and the further the lead's going to go. And that there is perfect on the clip where I've been catching them. As well, just a quick little thing, there's no point when you're fishing at distance, slacking and off your lines, trying to, like, you know, get everything to pin down, because you're fishing so far out anyway that you're going over so many different contours of the lake that you're just never ever going to get the presentation that you really want. So I try not to let it worry me too much. There's not much of a chop on today, a little bit of a headwind. Literally just get the reel handle. If you're a little bit carpy like me and you want them all in the same place, get the reel handle where you want it, and literally onto the rest, clip the bobbin on, nice heavy bobbin on right up to the top. Don't want a loose clutch, you want a fairly tight clutch, because you've got a lot of mono out there, and when you get a bite it's going to act like a bit of a bungee cord anyway. Straight on the rod and bang, you're into a fish. And that is how I chuck distance. Lead selection plays a massive part when you're distance fishing. Don't just think that if you go into your bag and you pick the biggest lead out that you got, that you're going to necessarily cast as far as you can potentially chuck. First of all, shape. You want to be fishing with something that is shaped like this. You don't want to be fishing with a pear lead, you know, a square shaped lead, a gripper lead, because they're just not going to fly as aerodynamic as a distance casting lead. 3 leads in my hand here, 4 ounce, 4 1/4 ounce and a 4.5 ounce. Now these are the 3 sizes of lead that I would be using for distance fishing. 4 ounce would be to use as much as I could possibly get away with. So if the wind was like it is today, it's not massively strong, I would use the 4 ounce. 2 reasons. A, because it gets me to where I want to go, and second reason, when I'm catching fish and the lead stays on, obviously it isn't as big as a 4 1/4 and a 4 1/2, so you've got a lot less chances should you know put around under the rod tip getting hook balls or what have you. The bigger leads, 4 1/4s, 4 1/2s, I'll be using them. Say if a crosswind got up and I was tightening down, if you're tightening down to a lighter lead, you're probably going to drag it. But another thing as well, I'd say, is don't necessarily just go for the biggest lead, because if you're not strong, or if casting's not your thing, and your muscles haven't built up, or la-di-da-la, whatever, the list goes on. If you go and pick a big lead and you try and get that moving through the air, you're not going to be able to get that moving very fast. And if you can't get it moving fast and you're not compressing the rod, you're not going to be getting to where you want to fish. So I know it sounds obvious, but choose the lead size that suits you best. I can cast further with a 4 or a 4 1/4 ounce lead than what I can with a 4 1/2 ounce lead, and the reason for that is because I'm not strong enough to get a 4 1/2 ounce lead and to compress the rod enough to get it going as well as it should be going. So for me, a 4 1/4 is absolutely perfect. The wind gets up and you're having issues, a 4 1/2 is absolutely perfect. You've got a bite on a 4 1/4 ounce lead. Yeah, these rods have got such a nice action on them. Nice to be able to lift the rod up and bend into a fish. So this is just rolled, and it's actually a mirror, and the ratio I would say to mirrors and commons is about 100 to 1. I don't know, I think maybe they might have all been stocked at a similar time, because once you've caught one mirror you normally get a couple, but it can take absolutely ages to get a mirror, or you can go for a few sessions and not get one. But this seems to be, it's quite a nice one as well, to be fair. I've not got a good glimpse of it. It looks like a good, a fairly good fish, but it's gone quiet for an hour, so maybe the commons have moved off and the mirrors have moved on. Here he comes. He looks like it's a nice fish as well, to be fair. There he is. Oh yes, the first mirror. There's quite a lot of people around the lake today, and I'm probably only 10-15 yards past the anglers either side of me, and they haven't had anything yet, and it just shows that by getting everything right, going that little bit of extra distance, getting your tackle well balanced and being able to fish at them ranges, that you really can put extra bonus fish on the bank. And this mirror proves, and it looks like there's going to be a few more on the cards too, so I'm going to slip him back, fingers crossed for a few more fish. While I'm putting a few more boilies out, I'm just going to sort of run over how I bait on venues of this size and with the stocking level that this has got in it. Now, I've done a lot of fishing abroad in the past, and I've sort of learnt a lot off of what the foreign anglers do. And the way they fish is a little bit different, or it's a lot different to how I see a lot of people fish in the UK, and certainly like me myself, I'd never even thought about doing it before. But for argument's sake, say we're here at Durleigh today, I'm fishing at 120 yards. My fishing rods are clipped up at 30 rod lengths. My spod rod is clipped up at 28.5 rod lengths. So my fishing rods are about a rod length by the time they sort of swing back and what have you behind the baited area. So the fish that I'm fishing for are obviously beyond the bait that I'm putting out. So the first thing that they're going to come into contact with is going to be the baited area. As well, I'm not spodding at my absolute maximum. I could go and fish sort of 140, 150 yards with a spod, but that doesn't really give me any room behind. Now, even though I'm fishing behind my bait today, the fish are responding to the bait. They're coming in it and I'm regularly getting bites. But if I found that, say after 2 or 3 hours, nothing had happened over the bait, because I haven't baited at my maximum, what that then allows me to do is to mark my line with a bit of pole elastic so I know where I am, save me having to wrap back up again. I can bring the rod in, maybe put a small hook bait on if you want to get extreme distance, change over, put a solid PVA bag on, what have you. But what it allows me to do is it allows me to go 25, 30, 40 yards behind the bait that I've put out, and I think that is a massive, massive edge. If you've baited to your maximum and you can't go any further and the fish aren't responding to bait, all you've done is you've put the fish in an unreachable position. So I think by baiting further than the lads either side of you, or the same range if they're chucking at distance, what have you, but not baiting as far as you possibly can, because not every day, you know, every day is different. Not every day they want bait, and luckily enough on this occasion they've wanted bait. But the other week I come down, put bait out, fished on it for half the day, ended up wasting half the day, sort of got the ump a bit, if you like, oh, why hasn't it worked, because I almost know every time it does work down here. Took them out the clip, blasted them long with the wind behind me, and it completely changed my day around, and I ended up catching 8 or 9 fish. So, you know, it's just important that don't bait to your absolute maximum. Bait where you're comfortable fishing, but always give yourself space behind should you need to go behind. Hadn't had a bite for about hour and a half, I suppose it was, 2 hours. Come down, dropped 3 more spodfuls of boilies out over the top, and no sooner I sat back down, it ripped off, and I got this one, which looks rather impressive. The biggest fish I've ever had out of here, despite catching a fair few fish from here, is just shy of 25 pounds, and this, to me, looks like it could potentially be larger. So everything's all zeroed and ready to rock and roll. Really long fish these, because they're not fat and they're just muscle. A bit like myself, they weigh a lot more than what they appear. So let's weigh them up. 25 pounds and 10 ounces. That is my biggest ever fish caught from Durleigh. What a result, well happy with that. Oh, look at that. What a creature. Proper long, absolutely beat me up. On this occasion the lead ejected and the fish hit the surface almost instantly on the take. And yeah, he pretty much just waddled in all the way on the surface, give it a little bit under the rod tip, but yeah, he was soon in, and the old size 4 weren't coming out. Absolutely awesome. Hopefully now this quiet part of the day's come and gone, but now we're getting into the evening. I'm going to get a few more spots of bait out there, and hopefully it revs up again and the action continues into the evening until we got to leave. But for now, I'm absolutely buzzing with this one.
And into the fire, out of the darkness and into the fire. Destiny's waiting into the fire, out of the darkness and into the fire. History's waiting.
Well, it's looking likely that this is going to be the last bite of the day. Hasn't been mental action this evening like I thought it was going to be, but all the same, it's been a massively enjoyable day. I think 13 or 14 fish now I've hooked, which for a day session, you know, to me is absolutely brilliant. A couple of good 20s as well. All caught at long range, 30 rod lengths, 120 yards. Over, well, I've used all the bait now that I brought with me, so 3 kilos of boilies. So no, I haven't gone through loads and loads of bait, just trickling it in little and often. It's certainly kept the bites coming, so hopefully I can get this one in and then end the day on a high. 15, 18 pounds, something like that. There we go. A good end to a brilliant day. And here he is, the last carp of the day. Hope you've enjoyed watching it. I certainly enjoyed filming it. It's been a brilliant day. The weather's been perfect and the fish have been more than obliging to have a little bit of food. Hopefully from this you can pick up a few tips and you yourselves can go out there and catch a few carp at long range.